So we now have Backtrack ready to start up the GUI, which is your Start X, your X windows. While that's taking place, you can see we run in Burp Suite there, which we're going to come back to. Our Tomcat is still running, and we want to just verify that our IP address of our host machine, which in my case, mine is the 1.77, so that we can then go in, make sure we can access the 1.77. Now, when you're starting to configure the different settings, like, you could see how advanced mine is based upon being able to use Linux to access my other machine, what you need to do is actually turn off your firewall. Yes, I do realize that that's not normally the best option, but in this instance, you want to make sure you don't have your firewall on, otherwise you're not going to be able to access that mini web server. So in this case, you could go and create an exception in the firewall rule, or otherwise just simply turn it off, which naturally, when you're doing pen tests and hackhead, is something that could be very important. So double checking my IP address again, the 177, going to Backtrack. We can then go and try and ping that IP address. So let's see if we can ping successfully. First of all, maybe if I can type correctly without typos. And we can see the host is unreachable. So we might have a slight problem there. Let's see what our address is. And our address is 137. Let's see if we can actually ping the default gateway to make sure we got connectivity. In our option, we don't. So it seems to be that there is a slight problem with Backtrack not getting a proper IP address from our network. So nothing coming back there. And this is where you can then go along and actually statically configure your IP address. So in this instance, what I'm going to do is change my settings to NAT, which will give you another form of security. And when you're using the live CDs, the nice part about using a live CD, you're not too concerned with losing any data, because it's just simply accessing all of the information from the ISO. So you're not going to lose any data. But you could then go along and select that as NAT, power on the virtual machine again, and we should be up and running in a few minutes. Whilst at the same time, I can make sure on my host machine that I can actually access the gateway, as well as perhaps do some DNS name resolution. So you can just go along and choose to ping domain name. Make sure you can access the internet and you're doing name resolution. Pretty straightforward. So we should have Backtrack up and running in a few minutes. We'll be able to then finish this part of the initial exercise. So naturally, folks, you could see how I've been showing you an array of different techniques. I know it might be a little confusing at this point, but that's the beauty of using videos, is that we can always go along and pause it, follow through, copy the steps that I'm going through, and then continue to pause it, rewind it if you get stuck. So there's a lot more demonstration coming up. At this point, again, I've got to start the networking, and remember using your tab. That will start the interface. So when you use NAT, you've got to remember that using NAT, it's going to use the actual address of the adapter for NAT specifically. And so mine is against the 192.168.75.131. And then I'm going to start X. And that would then give me connectivity to the net. And we'll just wait for the actual X windows to finish loading up. Remember, folks, this is also Backtrack 4. So not only is it free, but it's also in beta form. So you cannot guarantee that you're going to have every single tool and component work. So we'll test connectivity to the internet by just simply launching Mozilla Firefox. And then whilst we're waiting for that to launch, we can go along to the different forums like the remote exploit. And it is true, we can access the internet. So we know that our interface is now working. And if we go along to the K start basically, or the start with that little backtrack icon, and we can go to the different types of areas that we want to perform testing against. So if we look at the vulnerability identification and go along to, it's pretty quick because we're booting from the ISO. So I want to go to the web analysis, and this is where I can bring up the Web Scarab Lite or Paros Proxy. And of course I'm going to launch Paros Proxy because we will cover Burp Suite in more detail. So when you bring up Paros, select Accept. And at this point, once again, you would have to look at, if I can just hide my VMware. No, we don't want to see that tip. Thank you. And we can go along to the Tools, Options, and if we click on the local proxy, it runs on localhost 8080. So at this point, I'll have to go to Mozilla Firefox and then go to the Tools, or at least the Edit, Preferences, specify the Advanced Network, and then have a look at the settings, and we're going to use manual proxy configuration. So there we'll just type in the local host, port 8080, and we're going to say use this for all protocols. Select OK, close that down. And now as an example, just to show you what's going to take place when I go along and search different sites. Now because I've got some data at the secureia.com site, I'm going to use them as an attack. I don't want to be attacking anybody else's site. And at this point we could see, going back to Paros, how this information now is going back and forth through Paros, and we're not actually trapping any of that information at this point. So let's wait for that to resolve. I think one of the other settings that I forgot to click, if I go back to the settings, would be, and this is a common mistake as you just see me make it, it says no proxy for localhost 127.0.0.1. We've got to delete that because we do want it to be a proxy for that as well. And we can then go back to the browser and simply refresh that and then look to reconnect. So at this time you can see how our information is now going through Paros. So let's, while we're at this point, use a target site perhaps that we're just going to do a spider against. And once we've actually configured Paros, we could go along to the actual tools, and you can see you've got quite a few different tools listed there. If we go along to the file, you can create a new session, but we are looking to analyze that target site initially, so we could select spider, and it depends obviously what you've selected on your left hand side here. So before you go and crawl that site, make sure that you actually have your target site in your list. So at this point, what we can do is close down Mozilla Firefox, open up a new session, and we could use SecureIA as an example. There it's connecting. And we're going to give that a few minutes. Remember, what we're doing, folks, is we're going through many different proxies. So sometimes it does take a bit of time to actually populate because we are going through those different proxies. So we'll give it another minute or two. If that doesn't want to come up, well, we won't waste too much time on that. We'll then simply go along to add another address. Right, so still nothing coming up there. Well, we'll go and pick on somebody else. Let's have a look at Metasploit as an example. That came up pretty quick. So at that point, that should be in Paros. And we can now click on the Metasploit. You can either right-click on and choose the spider, or go to the Analyze and choose Spider. And so you'd select Start. And that's going to go along and actually spider the Metasploit website. So that will be the first part for us to really get access to that information for us to better analyze. So this is just really going back to the good old days where you would have otherwise, go to the shell or command prompt, and you would go and send those commands to the actual web server or mail server. So, very important thinking back to where the internet came from and using good old command line or shell programs. This is pretty much exactly what we're actually doing. So we'll wait for that to finish, and then we'll come back and continue to escalate these levels of exercises.